So we're getting into chapter 10 today, and if you've got your book, go ahead and turn to chapter 10. And I want to start out looking at the idea of a prison subculture and the inmate subculture and how these differ between males and females. We're actually going to take 2 weeks to do this entire chapter because we're going to look at things like the inmate subculture. We're going to look at parental imprisonment and the effects on children here. We're going to look at special needs of females and some other things. So we're going to be covering quite a bit in this chapter, and it's going to take us 2 weeks to do that. Now, if you've got your books, like I said, go ahead and turn to the part where we talk about what the inmate subculture is. And I'm just looking at some of the definitions. Keep in mind that a subculture is really nothing more than the habits and customs and the values that a person embodies while they're in that prison or while they're in that particular location. A subculture, of course, exists not only in prison, but it exists in jobs. Police officers have subcultures. It's the values and the norms that we have, and we call the process of getting those socialization. So with this, we look at how does a prison subculture actually form, and you can look in your book again. There's basically three theories how this comes about. The deprivation theory. So when we look at this idea of a subculture, deprivation theory essentially says that this subculture that exists within the prison system, and by the way, I'm going to break off for a second here. The male subculture is much more gang oriented, it's much more violent, it's much more violent, like I said, than the women's subculture. The women's subculture is more pseudo-family. It's more relationally built. So that's a brief description of how these two differ. The deprivation theory says that these subcultures come about because of the deprivations that a person suffers by being in prison. Because they're deprived of things that they had on the outside, that causes them to act in specific ways while they're actually in the institution itself. The importation theory is a little bit different, and what it says is, no, wait a minute. It's not the deprivations that cause this individual to act in this way or to have these specific types of beliefs. It's the fact that that's the way this person typically is. That's the way they were outside the prison, and they're bringing this into the prison. And importation theory would say this: a person who is violent in society will be violent in the prison. They're bringing those beliefs, they're bringing that subculture and those things that they learned from the outside the prison, their pre-prison life, and they're bringing those values and norms into the institution itself. Then you have what we call the integration model. The integration model is really a combination of the two. And what it says is that in childhood, some inmates acquired, usually from peers, values that support law violating behavior, but that the norms and standards in prison also affect inmate. So what this says is that, yeah, it's a combination of the two. You can have values outside to where an individual is committing crimes and they learn those from the outside, but then what happens is they come into the prison system and they have to essentially adapt to the standards that are in the prison system as well. And as I said beforehand, when we look at these individuals who are coming in, we have a lot more men coming into the prison system. Men are typically more violent than women are. Men form relations based upon gangs. Women form more of a pseudo-family aspect. And we'll get into the pseudo-families a little bit later as well, because that's an important part of the women socialization process into the prison system. So we can look at these social structures. Your book also talks about the different languages that are used. But I'm also going to look briefly at the characteristics of women inmates, and we are going to touch on this as well. And as I said before, I specifically do want to talk about women inmates and some of the issues they have here. When you look at the women inmates that are there, not as many are there for violent offenses as are men that we see there. You have quite a few for drug offenses and other things there. But again, keep in mind, women are only making up about 7 to 10% of the prison population. Some of the other things I do want to get into in this chapter, and we're going to have articles on, how many women are mothers that are coming into the system? How many parents, and that includes men, are we putting into the system and are leaving children behind in the outside? those are some of the other issues that I do want to get into. As always, if you've got any questions, you can put them on the Q&A forum or send me an email. Hope you guys have a great day.